Under the sharp glare of camera lights, a familiar tension returns to the national stage, the debate over immigration. This time, it isn't just about policy or borders. It's about identity, faith, and the direction of a country that continues to redefine what it means to belong. The exchange began with a simple but loaded question. Should America continue to accept millions of newcomers each year, even when some arrive legally, work hard, and contribute to society? The answer from the vice president was blunt and deliberate. He said, "My job as vice president is not to look out for the interests of the whole world. It is to look out for the people of the United States." That single statement rippled through the country, sparking applause among supporters who say immigration must serve national interest, and criticism from those who see such remarks as a retreat from America's founding values. For decades, the United States has wrestled with this contradiction. A nation built by immigrants, yet divided over how many should be allowed in and under what conditions. Every administration faces the same question, though the tone of the answers changes with each political season. Analysts note that the vice president's remarks reflect a growing populist sentiment across Western democracies. From Washington to Warsaw, from London to Rome, leaders are reframing immigration not just as a humanitarian or economic issue, but as a question of sovereignty, identity, and cultural stability. But in the US, the debate runs deeper than numbers or laws. It touches the emotional core of what many call the American story. Across the nation, the conversation has merged with broader themes: faith, community, and moral renewal. In the aftermath of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk's death, his movement, Turning Point USA, has experienced what many are calling a revival. The organization's leaders say this resurgence has tied the immigration debate to questions of national purpose and moral clarity. At the University of Mississippi, student leader Lindsay Lockman described a dramatic rise in engagement. She said that since Kirk's death, their membership has grown to over 1,500 students, a surge she attributes to a shared sense of cultural mission. Meetings, she says, are filled to capacity. An interesting and wonderful problem to have, she added. That renewed energy isn't limited to campuses. Across churches and community halls, conservative groups are connecting immigration to broader questions of national renewal. Bible sales reportedly jumped 36% in the weeks following Kirk's passing, a statistic that some commentators have labeled the Charlie Kirk Effect. Behind that phrase lies a powerful message that political activism and spiritual awakening are becoming intertwined in the modern American right. Faith leaders describe it as a return to roots, while sociologists see it as a response to social anxiety and demographic change. As one commentator put it, people have woken up and taken to the streets, protesting with their words, their hearts, and letting it be known that Christ is King. To many, that statement represents more than religion. It reflects a vision of cultural defense, a belief that immigration should strengthen, not dilute, the nation's moral fabric. But critics warn that framing immigration through faith and nationalism risks deepening divisions. They argue that faith traditions, including Christianity, historically emphasize compassion for the stranger and refuge for the displaced. Religious scholars remind Americans that nearly every major wave of immigration, from Irish Catholics in the 19th century to Vietnamese refugees in the 20th century, has been met with suspicion and hostility. The 1970s was once seen as a cultural threat before becoming an integral part of the American identity. Still, the tone of the current debate has shifted. Where past arguments centered on economic competition and labor markets, today's discourse focuses more on belonging, culture, and ideology. The rhetoric from both sides is increasingly moral. When the vice president declared that America cannot commit to letting in 1 million or 10 million people every year, he was not only setting a policy boundary, but redefining the moral framework of national responsibility. Supporters say it's a recognition of realism, that nations must prioritize their citizens first. Opponents, however, see it as a shrinking of America's moral vision, one that historically embraced the tired and poor who sought freedom on its shores. Around the world, the same themes echo. In Europe, debates over asylum and integration have reshaped politics from France to Germany. In Canada, the conversation has turned toward how immigration impacts housing and jobs. And in Asia, countries like Japan and South Korea, long known for their tight immigration controls, are now quietly expanding worker programs to offset aging populations. The US, by contrast, sits at the crossroads of these global dynamics, a magnet for opportunity and a mirror of modern anxieties. In border states, the human cost is evident. Families arrive after long, perilous journeys through Central America, seeking safety or a better life. Local communities strain under the weight of new arrivals, while border agents face overcrowded facilities and limited resources. Images of families huddled under emergency blankets or children waiting in temporary shelters continue to polarize public opinion. Economists warn that reducing legal immigration too sharply could harm growth in key sectors, from agriculture and construction to technology. Immigrants account for nearly 17% of the US labor force, and in states like California, Texas, and Florida, their contributions underpin entire industries. Yet the political mood has hardened. Polls show growing frustration over what many see as a broken system, laws that neither prevent illegal entry nor provide efficient pathways for legal migration. Some argue that the real issue is not immigration itself, but integration, how to ensure newcomers share in the responsibilities and values of their adopted homeland. Others insist that national identity should be flexible enough to absorb cultural differences without fear. Amid this debate, faith and politics intersect once again. Congregations across the Midwest and South are filling with young Americans who say they want to reclaim the soul of the country. What began as political activism has evolved into what some describe as a cultural awakening, a new generation blending religious conviction with civic engagement. For these youth movements, immigration isn't just about policy, it's about the kind of nation they hope to inherit. To them, protecting borders is synonymous with protecting values. For their critics, however, this revival risks confusing nationalism with faith. In public squares and television studios, both sides claim moral authority. One sees compassion as the essence of patriotism. The other views restraint as the duty of leadership. The debate has also taken a personal turn. Many Americans who trace their roots to earlier waves of migration now express ambivalence toward new arrivals. Their argument: we came legally, we waited our turn, and the system should be fair. But immigration scholars point out that legality itself has evolved over time. The laws that allowed European migration in the early 20th century often excluded Asians and Africans. Policies considered legal then might not be today, and vice versa. In other words, the debate about legality is as much about history as it is about ethics. Beyond US borders, the world watches. Nations across Latin America, from Mexico to Guatemala, are balancing domestic pressure with the flow of people moving north. International organizations urge the US to adopt a more humanitarian approach, emphasizing shared responsibility for global displacement caused by wars, climate change, and poverty. Yet within America, the political calendar looms large. As elections approach, immigration once again becomes a defining campaign issue. Candidates invoke it to rally supporters, often framing it as a choice between security and chaos, compassion and control. In rallies and speeches, the imagery is powerful: caravans at the border, overwhelmed hospitals, or classrooms filled beyond capacity. But rarely do these images capture the quieter stories: the small business owner who employs migrant workers, the refugee child excelling in school, the farmer who depends on seasonal labor to harvest crops. Amid the noise, ordinary Americans remain conflicted. Many express sympathy for migrants while demanding stronger enforcement. Polls show majorities supporting both tougher border security and broader legal pathways, a sign that nuance still exists, even if it rarely dominates headlines. For communities along the border, the debate isn't theoretical, it's lived reality. Towns like El Paso, McAllen, and Brownsville are on the front line, balancing humanitarian duty with local strain. Churches distribute food and water, civic groups coordinate temporary housing, law enforcement manages surges with limited manpower. In Washington, negotiations continue, proposals for asylum reform, temporary worker programs, and high-tech border monitoring. But consensus remains elusive. Each party accuses the other of political theatre, and progress stalls under partisan gridlock. Still, amid division, one truth persists: immigration continues to define the American experiment. It is both a source of strength and a wellspring of conflict, a reminder that the nation's greatest ideals are often its greatest challenges. As the Vice President's comments echo through talk shows and digital feeds, they reveal more than a policy stance. They expose a moral crossroads between self-preservation and global empathy, between national interest and universal compassion. For some, this is a long overdue return to realism. For others, it's a retreat from the promise engraved on the Statue of Liberty. Yet in this struggle lies the essence of democracy, a nation constantly arguing with itself, defining and redefining who belongs. And perhaps that, more than any single policy, is what keeps the American story alive, a continuing argument about freedom, fairness, and the future of those who still believe in both.